After my husband died, I thought I'd never love again. But a few months later, my ex-boyfriend, the man who betrayed me when I was young, came back into my life. He said he was sorry, that he still loved me. And like a fool, I believed him. I married him. I thought maybe this was fate giving me a second chance. But then one night, I heard him whispering to someone on the phone, soft, romantic words I hadn't heard in a long time. And then I realized he wasn't talking to me. He was talking to another woman, his wife. Please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're hearing my story of revenge. I want to know how far it's gone. This is Claire, and here's how it all happened. Grief does strange things to a person. It slows the world down until every hour feels like a week, and then suddenly speeds it up so fast you can't remember what day it is. After David, my husband, passed away, the house felt too big, the silence too loud. Every corner still carried his scent. The coffee mug he used every morning was still on the counter. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and reach out, expecting his hand to be there. It never was. People tell you time heals. They lie. Time doesn't heal. It just teaches you how to hide the wound. And then, one afternoon, about 5 months after the funeral, I got a message on Facebook. Ethan, my first love, the man who once made me believe in forever, then disappeared without warning when we were barely 20. His profile picture showed him in a tailored suit, a charming smile, that same dimple I used to trace with my thumb. My heart stuttered, even as my mind screamed no. He said, "I heard about David. I'm so sorry, Claire. I can't imagine your pain. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here." I should have ignored it, but I didn't. We started talking, at first about harmless things, like how life had changed, old memories, the music we used to love. Then came the deeper stuff, regrets, loneliness, those long confessions people make when they think they've been given a second chance. He said he never stopped thinking about me, that losing me was his biggest mistake, that maybe, in some strange twist of fate, we were meant to find our way back to each other. Loneliness makes fools of the smartest people. I told myself it wasn't love, just comfort, two broken souls leaning on each other. But comfort turned into visits, visits turned into dinners, and dinners turned into mornings where I'd find his toothbrush beside mine. It happened so fast. Before I could catch my breath, Ethan proposed to me. He did it in the most familiar way, at the same lake where we used to skip stones when we were teenagers. The sunset, the quiet waves, his eyes full of that old warmth. My heart told me it was wrong, but my body craved to feel alive again. So I said yes. For a while, I convinced myself we were happy. He was attentive, always by my side, telling me how he wished we'd never lost all those years. He talked about traveling, about building something new together. My friends said I deserved happiness again, and I wanted to believe them. But small things started feeling off. Phone calls he'd take in another room, the way he'd turn his phone face down when we were together, the late-night drives he brushed off as just clearing his head. He'd always been charming, but now that charm felt practiced. One night, I woke up around midnight and found his side of the bed empty. The faint sound of his voice came from the study downstairs. I walked halfway down the stairs, careful not to make a sound. He was whispering. His tone was soft, the kind of soft that only belongs to love. "Yeah, baby, I miss you too. Just a little longer, okay? She has no idea. My stomach dropped. I stood frozen, listening, my heart pounding so loud I thought he'd hear it. I didn't need to hear more. The way he said baby was enough. That word used to be mine. When I crept back into bed, my hands were shaking. Every memory replayed in my head, every touch, every smile, all of it suddenly fake. I stared at the ceiling until morning, and by sunrise, I wasn't crying anymore, just empty. The next day, I started observing. Quietly. He'd leave early, saying he had meetings, but I'd notice the smell of a woman's perfume on his shirt when he came home. Sometimes he'd hum a song under his breath, one I didn't recognize. I didn't go through his phone. I didn't hire anyone. That wasn't the kind of revenge I wanted. I didn't want proof. I wanted understanding. I wanted to know why. Why me? Why now? The answer came 2 weeks later, in the most humiliating way possible. I was at the bank, updating paperwork for David's estate. One of the clerks mentioned Ethan's name in passing. He'd apparently been asking about the inheritance transfer. My chest tightened. There was no reason for him to even know about that process. Unless that was the whole reason he came back. That night, when he came home, I looked at him differently. I watched him lie with such confidence, smiling like he loved me, touching me like he was his world. I realized I wasn't living with my soulmate. I was living with a snake that had been planning its strike for years. And that's when something inside me shifted. I didn't break down, I didn't scream or throw things. I just smiled and decided to play along. If Ethan wanted to play a game, he'd chosen the wrong opponent.
From that day on, everything about me changed, but not in a way Ethan could see. I became quieter, softer, more agreeable, the perfect wife. I laughed at his jokes, cooked his favorite meals, told him he made me feel safe. Inside, I was cold as stone, watching him, learning him, memorizing every little weakness he tried so hard to hide. See, when someone thinks they're smarter than you, the easiest way to control them is to make them believe you're harmless. Ethan thought I was broken. That's what made me perfect for him. Easy to deceive, easy to mold. He had no idea that the woman he thought he was fooling had already buried one husband and survived it. There's a kind of strength that grows out of loss, something that makes you stop fearing pain because you've already met it face to face. So, I started to act the part he expected, the grieving widow who just wanted to be loved again. I asked him for advice, praised him, told him how lucky I felt to have him. I saw the way his chest puffed up when I said those things. Men like Ethan feed on admiration. They mistake it for control. The more I gave, the more careless he became. He started taking longer business trips, spending money without hiding it, and leaving his phone unattended once he thought I'd stopped asking questions. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at me, not with love, but calculation, as if he was measuring how much longer he had to keep up the act before his little scheme paid off. But I never confronted him, not once. Instead, I started preparing, not for exposure, not for proof, but for performance. I began redecorating the house, turning it into something warm, comfortable, and just a little too perfect. He loved that. "You're making this place feel alive again," he said one evening, wrapping his arms around me. I smiled and kissed his cheek. "I'm just trying to make it ours," I whispered. What I didn't tell him was that I was already building him a stage, one he wouldn't realize he was standing on until the curtain fell. I started asking him about his business, pretending to be supportive. He loved talking about money, about how he'd helped me organize my finances since the inheritance. Every time he bragged, I'd listen closely, dropping little questions that made him feel clever when he explained. It didn't take long to find out that he'd been quietly transferring small amounts from my late husband's trust fund into an account under his control. Not enough to trigger alarms, just enough to test the system. Ethan thought he was subtle. He wasn't. But rather than stop him, I let him keep going. I made it easy for him. I even pretended to be forgetful. "Oh, did I sign that form? I don't remember. You're so good with this stuff, Ethan. I don't know what I would do without you." Every lie I spoke was a brick in the cage I was building around him. Then came the little touches, the kind that don't look like revenge at first. I started complimenting his wife. He didn't know I knew she existed, of course, but I'd drop subtle phrases, just enough to make him uneasy. One night over dinner, I smiled and said, "Do you ever wonder what it's like to live two lives? You know, being one person by day and someone else entirely at night?" He froze for a second, then laughed it off. "You've been watching too many movies," he said. "Maybe," I said, tilting my head, "but sometimes I think people like that forget which version of themselves is real." He didn't touch his food for a minute after that. Over time, I started to plant seeds, gentle ones, the kind that grow quietly. I'd pretend to be anxious and ask him strange questions. "Do you ever feel guilty about things you've done, even from years ago? Or do you ever wonder if karma actually catches up with people?" He'd smirk at first, but after a while, I noticed how he'd shift in his seat, how his smile would tighten. I wanted him to feel watched, not by me, but by something he couldn't name. The first real crack showed one night when he came home late, smelling like perfume again. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him, smiled softly, and said, "Welcome home, Ethan. I made your favorite." He hesitated. "You're not mad?" "Mad?" I laughed gently. "Why would I be mad?" He studied me like he was trying to find the trap, but there wasn't one. Not yet. See, people like him can handle anger. They can handle shouting, confrontation, even heartbreak. What they can't handle is kindness they don't deserve. That's the kind that eats them alive from the inside. And that's what I gave him. Every single day.
He'd wake up to breakfast in bed, sweet notes on his pillow, small gifts left on his desk, and the guilt, even if he didn't understand it yet, began to rot him. One night, I caught him sitting alone in the dark living room, staring at nothing. I pretended to wake up and walk in. "Hey," I whispered, "why are you up?" He blinked, startled, then forced a smile. "Just couldn't sleep," he said. "Bad dreams?" I asked. "Something like that." I walked over, touched his shoulder, and kissed the top of his head. "You're safe here," I murmured. "Nothing's going to hurt you." He nodded, but I could feel the tension in him. He wasn't afraid of dreams. He was afraid of himself. And that's when I knew. it was working. Because the most powerful revenge isn't exposing someone, it's making them see themselves clearly for the first time and hate what they see. It started small, the kind of unease you can't quite name. A missing key here, a misplaced document there. Ethan began to notice things weren't where he left them. His pen would be in a different drawer. His watch, which he always kept on the nightstand, would end up on the kitchen counter. He blamed stress, work, me even. "Claire," he said one morning, rubbing his temples, "did you move my phone last night?" I looked up from my coffee and smiled. "No, why would I?" "I swear I left it on the table," he muttered. "You sure you didn't—" "Maybe you're just tired," I interrupted gently. "You've been working a lot lately. Maybe take a break." The way I said it, soft, almost motherly, made him falter. He nodded, but I could see the flicker of doubt behind his eyes. A week later, I replaced the framed photo on his desk. It used to be of us. I switched it out for an old picture of him and a woman I found online who looked eerily similar to his wife. I wanted to see how long it would take him to notice. It took less than a day. "Claire," he said slowly, holding the frame, "where did this come from?" I blinked. "What do you mean?" "This isn't our picture." I leaned in, feigning confusion. "Of course it is. That's us at the cabin, remember?" He stared at the photo, then at me. No, that's not you." I tilted my head, smiling kindly like I was comforting a child. "Ethan, are you feeling okay?" His jaw clenched. "I'm fine." But he wasn't, and he knew it. From that moment on, I didn't need to move much. His mind started doing the work for me. Every sound in the house made him tense. Every time I smiled too long, he'd glance away. Sometimes I'd whisper his name when he was half asleep, just loud enough for him to stir. The next morning, I'd ask him if he slept well. "You were mumbling again," I'd say softly. "Sounded like you were apologizing to someone." He'd freeze. "Apologizing? For what?" I'd shrug. "I don't know. You just said, 'I'm sorry, baby,' over and over." The next few nights, he hardly slept. I could hear him tossing, pacing the hall. One night, I left the lamp on in the living room with an old voicemail playing on loop, just white noise and faint murmurs. I wanted him to think he'd left something running, that maybe his secrets were leaking out into the house itself. By morning, he was pale, his eyes bloodshot. "Did you leave the radio on?" he asked. "What radio?" I replied. He didn't answer. He started jumping at small noises, the phone ringing, the mail slot clattering. Once, he even dropped a glass when I walked up behind him too quietly. The man who once strutted through life like he owned it was now flinching at shadows. And still, I never raised my voice, never accused him. I just stayed steady, calm, loving. The contrast made him feel insane. Then came the perfect moment. We were having dinner, quiet, candlelight, soft music playing. He looked exhausted, barely eating. "Ethan," I said gently, "can I ask you something?" He glanced up warily. "What is it?" "Just curious. If someone you loved hurt you a long time ago, and they came back saying they'd changed, would you believe them?" He set his fork down. "Why are you asking me that?" "Just curious. People make mistakes, but the ones who really regret them, well, they live with that guilt forever, don't you think?" He swallowed, his eyes flickering. "Maybe,"
I smiled faintly. Maybe that's punishment enough. For the first time, I saw fear in his expression, not of me, but of himself. The kind of fear that comes when you start realizing your mask is slipping, even if no one's calling you out on it. That night, he didn't come to bed. I found him sleeping on the couch, clutching a pillow like a lifeline. Over the next few weeks, he grew paranoid. He'd check his phone constantly, delete messages as soon as they came through, and even changed his passwords twice. I made sure to act confused. "Why are you so secretive lately?" I'd ask, a touch of sadness in my voice. "Just work stuff," he'd mutter. I'd nod. "You used to tell me everything." He'd sigh, rub his face, and say, "I will, baby, just not right now." He called me baby less and less after that. I think it started to sound wrong in his mouth. And then the real cracks began to show. He came home one evening furious. His phone call with her must have caught wrong. He poured himself a drink, pacing. "She's crazy," he muttered. "She thinks I'm lying to her." I stood in the doorway, pretending not to understand. "Who?" He froze, realizing what he'd said. "No one. Work." I stepped closer, tilting my head. "You seem tired, Ethan. Maybe you should rest. Or maybe you should stop trying to live two lives."
His hand trembled around the glass. He didn't ask what I meant. He didn't have to. That's the beauty of psychological revenge. You don't tell them what you know. You make them guess how much you've seen. And the guessing eats them alive. Over the next month, Ethan started losing weight. He forgot things, stuttered when he lied, snapped at small questions. He even started looking over his shoulder when he left the house. I never mentioned it, but every time he came home, I greeted him with the same line. "You look tired, love. Hard day?" He'd nod numbly, and I'd kiss his cheek. Inside, I could almost hear the guilt grinding his bones to dust. He wanted my inheritance. He wanted control. But instead, he got to live in a house that slowly became a mirror, one that reflected the worst parts of himself back at him over and over until he couldn't tell which version of him was real anymore. And I wasn't finished yet. Not even close. The thing about guilt is that it doesn't scream. It whispers. It crawls under your skin and waits until the house is quiet enough for you to hear it breathing. Ethan had stopped meeting friends. He barely went to work. He sat by the window every morning, staring at nothing, sipping coffee that went cold in his hands. Sometimes I'd catch him just watching me, his eyes hollow, searching for something he couldn't name. One night, I stood in the doorway and asked softly, "Do you ever think about her?" He blinked. "Who?" "Your wife." He froze. His throat tightened. I don't know what you're talking about." I smiled faintly. "Of course you do." And then I turned and walked away. That was all it took. He didn't eat that night, didn't speak for 2 days. By the third day, he began talking to himself, low, frantic whispers that leaked through the bathroom door. Sometimes I'd stand outside and listen. He'd say her name, then mine, then his own over and over, as if he could somehow remind himself of who he was. I didn't have to touch his phone or his emails. I didn't need to tell him I knew everything. He was already confessing, not to me, but to the ghosts he'd made.
I started leaving small notes in places he'd find, folded neatly in his briefcase, his wallet, his coat pocket. Each one said something simple. Do you still think she doesn't know? You can't hide forever. She loved you once. No signature. No handwriting he could recognize. But the smell of my perfume lingered on the paper. He began losing sleep completely. The dark circles under his eyes deepened, his hair unkempt, his hands shaking even when he tried to pour coffee. One morning, I found him sitting at the table staring at one of the notes. His voice cracked when he asked, "Did you write this?" I looked at him, calm, collected, and said, "What note?" He laughed then, a dry, empty sound. "You're lying." I didn't respond. I just reached out and touched his cheek gently. "Ethan," I whispered, "you're scaring me." That broke him. He pushed the chair back, eyes wide, muttering, No, you don't get to do this," before walking out of the house. He didn't come home that night. When he finally did, his shirt was wrinkled, his breath heavy with whiskey, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. He dropped to his knees in front of me and said, "Claire, please, whatever you think you know, I'm sorry." Tears welled in his eyes, not for me, but for himself. I crouched down, cupped his face in my hands, and whispered, "Oh, Ethan, I forgave you a long time ago." That single line shattered him more than any scream could. Forgiveness, real or fake, is the cruelest weapon when the person can't forgive themselves. From that night on, I treated him like he was fragile glass. I smiled, cooked dinner, kissed his cheek, all while he crumbled silently beside me. He started writing letters to his wife. Letters he never sent. I found them hidden in his drawer. Apologies, explanations, desperate pleas. I never touched them. I just left one small addition. A note in the same pile that read, "She already knows." By the time he read it, he was too far gone to question who had written it. He began seeing shadows in corners, asking me if I had heard her voice when the house creaked at night. Sometimes I'd pause, pretend to listen, and say softly, "Yes, I think I did." He'd go pale every time. It was slow, methodical, beautifully quiet. And when I finally saw him standing in front of the mirror one morning, looking at his reflection like it was a stranger, I knew my work was done. He had lost everything long before I touched a single thing. His mind was now a maze of guilt, fear, and questions with no answers. That night, he packed a bag, didn't say a word. He just walked out. I watched him through the window as he drove away. A broken man chasing peace he'd never find. When the house finally fell silent, I poured myself a drink and smiled. He thought he could return to me for love, but he came back to meet the ghost of the woman he'd destroyed. And ghosts don't forget. A few weeks after Ethan left, the house began to feel alive again. Not cheerful, just lighter. It's strange how silence changes when guilt leaves a room. When he was here, even the quiet felt heavy. Now it was still, like the house could finally breathe again. I started going through his things one morning, not because I missed him, but because I wanted to clear the energy. That's when I found it. A small brown envelope, tucked behind a framed photo of us. Inside were two things: a letter and my late husband's watch.
The same watch that had gone missing months earlier. My hands shook a little as I opened the letter. It wasn't long, just a few lines written in Ethan's handwriting. I don't know who I am anymore. I see her everywhere. In you, in the mirrors, in my dreams. I thought I could rewrite the past, but I only trapped myself inside it. I'm sorry, Claire, for everything. I hope you find peace, because I can't. No signature, no goodbye. Just that. And the watch gleaming faintly under the light. I stood there for a long time staring at it. For the first time in months, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. Not the kind that forgives, the kind that understands too late that someone's punishment isn't death or loss, it's living with themselves. I placed the watch on the mantel beside a candle and whispered softly, "You finally kept something of his safe. Maybe that's your last good deed." After that day, I didn't hear from Ethan again. Not a call, not a text, nothing. It wasn't until almost a year later that I saw his name again in a small obituary notice buried deep down inside the local paper. He died quietly out of town. No family mentioned. No one listed as next of kin. Just a name and a date. I remember reading it over and over, waiting for something inside me to react, but there was no satisfaction, no victory, just silence. Because my revenge was never about destroying him. It was about making him see, truly see, what it feels like to live inside the pain he gave me. And he did, every day, until it consumed him. When people ask me now if I regret marrying him, I say no, because if I hadn't, I never would have learned how far I could go without lifting a single weapon. Revenge doesn't always look like fire and fury. Sometimes it's just a mirror, showing them who they really are until they can't bear to look anymore. That was mine. And when I finally let go of the anger, it didn't feel like forgiveness. It felt like freedom. So if you've ever been betrayed, broken, or made to feel small by someone who thought they could come back and take more from you, remember this. You don't have to scream to be heard. You just have to heal loudly enough that their guilt becomes the echo they can't escape. I still keep my husband's watch on that same mantle, not because it reminds me of loss, but because it reminds me that love, even after death, can be stronger than revenge. Ethan never understood that, and that's why he lost everything. Not just me, but himself. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is knowing you survived them. This is Claire, and that was my story. So what would you have done in my shoes? Be honest, would you have forgiven, or would you have made him feel what I did? Tell me in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share my story with someone who needs to hear that healing doesn't mean forgetting. Because sometimes closure isn't a door you close. It's the silence that follows when the knocking finally stops.